We're back with Team Rising. We got Henry Rogers and Stephen Cobb in the house. We've got some new poll numbers that we wanted to dig into here, guys. These are exclusive Hill-Harris-X new presidential preference poll. And consistent with a lot of what we've seen, we've got Biden in first, 34, Bernie in second, 20, Warren at 12, Harris at 9, Buttigieg at 5. So again, those are the top.
Margin of error 3.1.
5 contenders. Yep. Thank you for that. What do you think, Henry?
Well, these debates the next 2 days are going to be huge.
Yeah.
Obviously, we saw so many people kind of turn and side to one candidate after the first couple debates. So we're going to see here really what happens. I think these numbers are shocking in a way that Biden is clearly doing extremely well still. People would say that his poll numbers would drop substantially, and here he is looking pretty sharp. And at the same time, you have Bernie, who is still sitting very solidly.
Yeah.
So these candidates tomorrow and the next day are really going to have to get their voices out there. If
Bernie
they want to push
holding
this
at
thing.
20 very much dispels it was his obituary after
Bernie's campaign
Bernie's
is in
campaign
big
is over.
trouble,
I mean, the guy's doing very, very well here.
Yeah,
One thing I thought was interesting, Stephen, is Kamala Harris obviously got the biggest media bump out of the second debate. Nate Silver pointed out last week, we talked about it on this show, about how there might even been a boomerang effect where they got an initial bump, but a couple weeks out didn't really hold. So
and kind of inverse for Biden, right?
Yes, right.
So he took a dip and looks like to have rehabilitated
he went
a little
right
bit.
back up.
The two biggest winners coming out of that first debate were, to me, undoubtedly Kamala Harris and Julian Castro. I mean, Secretary Castro was polling right around 1%.
Yeah.
He's now consistently in the 3 or 4, so he got a nice bump out of that as well. So it'll be interesting to see, kind of coming out of this week, who's able to maintain, who's able to get that next bump. Will we solidify on one debate stage going forward, depending upon who is able to kind of solidify themselves, at least amongst the polling data going forward?
Yeah, well, and Kamala is clearly trying to maintain or give some more life to her campaign. One of the criticisms of her is that she doesn't have a specific policy vision. She's kind of taken the bits and pieces that she thinks are popular. She's out this morning with her Medicare for All plan. Now, you both will recall that she's gone back and forth over whether or not she supports a role for private insurers in Medicare for All. This appears to at least be the final answer here, that she does want private insurers involved. She also has a longer timeline for implementation than Sanders' Medicare for All plan. I mean, to me, it just feels like she's, rather than trying to figure out what the right policy is, she's trying to figure out where the right public opinion is.
Yeah, this is the most poll-tested thing I've ever seen.
Isn't she also flip-flopping? Wasn't she in full support of Sanders'
Yeah, and then
plan?
she revoked it.
She was a co-sponsor.
Yeah.
Now, okay, let's listen to some of the details. We got a 10-year transition. Americans below 65 could buy into the Medicare program, but this is now something where it would take a while. Private insurance would remain. I mean, Stephen, at a certain point, shouldn't you just be like, no, I'm not for Medicare for All. I'm for covering everybody, which is what Joe Biden wants. Be like, I'm for a public option. That probably seems like the more electable position.
Well, I want to take a step back and look at this from a macro issue, which is that healthcare was the #1 policy area for Democrats running on in the midterms. It polls incredibly high, and regardless of where you fall kind of on that spectrum, whether you're with Joe Biden and an incremental approach or whether you're on Medicaid for All, voters are really focused on the fact that healthcare is an issue that needs the focus of the federal government going forward. So being able to bring your plan forward, have that intellectual debate about it is helping all Democratic candidates, regardless of where they are on that spectrum. But I think you're right to an extent. I think Senator Harris is really trying to thread the needle between an incremental approach that allows for a private option and that Medicare for All, to try and perhaps jockey to both those different camps of voters.
It seems like Hillary Clintonism to me. This is exactly what I'm a progressive who likes to get things done. And it's like that's what this looks like. The most poll test. I mean, I just don't understand. It's like that was a great reading. Yeah, it's like just come out and say you're not for Medicare for All.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like I don't agree with John. I respect that at least John Delaney will get out there and say this is what I'm all about and this is why. Yeah. And my personal theory of political change that I think has been validated a lot in the way that people actually think about politics is they are less focused on do they include the private insurers or not, or versus do I think they're actually telling me what they believe and what they actually want to accomplish. accomplished. And that's with Sanders. Like, he will tell you the pieces of this that are poll less well. He'll be upfront about them. Yes, we're going to raise middle class taxes. On the other hand, you're going to pay a lot less in terms of health insurance, premiums, deductibles, etc. Kamala has no details here even about how it's paid
I think
for.
it's just because she doesn't want to lose that base of very progressive voters.
She doesn't want to get attacked by Bernie
have it all.
supporters. She also doesn't want to lose her Joe Biden support.
But also, campaign time really isn't necessarily the best time to have a fully vetted, nationalized healthcare proposal. I think if we did that, then it hasn't been marked up yet. It hasn't gone through expert review. Chris, I take a slightly different tact on what I think has long-term benefits, which is that which can actually get done. And so I think people look to the politicians who make reasonable goals and say that they can build coalitions of support around it, and then build upon that, whether that's healthcare, whether that's something else.
You worked in the Obama administration. What is a reasonable goal in terms of going to Mitch McConnell and trying to get support for anything to do with healthcare and positive improvements to Obamacare or anything else? Like, that's not reasonable or realistic.
Well, I mean, there is a lot that will focus on who has the majority in the Senate. There is no doubt. But I think that you will find folks on both sides of the aisle who are willing to focus on areas of agreement when it comes.
So a final thing,
you're living in a fantasy land. I'm sorry. I wish I lived there too, but we don't.
Well, except that there were Republicans who crossed over to prevent Mitch McConnell from tearing down all of the Affordable Care Act.
Did they vote for Obamacare? We couldn't even get the Democrats to vote for a public option.
The votes are there. Right. So if you couldn't get all the Democrats to vote for the public option when you had near a supermajority in the Senate, why do you think that's an available option now?
Should we just give up? I mean, that's what Biden is running on, the most centrist plan, and that's the public option. That doesn't seem realistic to me either. So maybe we should just give up.
Maybe it's an incremental approach, and you continue to build consensus, both on the policy side and in elections.
Final thing I do want to get in here. A recession is coming eventually. Here's what you'll see first. This is from the New York Times. Ben Castleman, he says, indicator one will be the unemployment rate. What matters is where the things begin to change. The yield curve, something that economists on the show have been pointing at for quite a long time. Then you start looking at the manufacturing index, consumer sentiment, and all of that. Really what it just comes down to is all the indicators are not flashing red, but they might be like a tinge of orange at this point. Nobody knows when or where this thing will come, if it even will. Stephen, I mean, if there is a recession, it will dramatically change the dynamics of this entire campaign, right?
Of course, of course. And I think the largest indicator that people are talking about really isn't an indicator at all. It's really that, we've had 10 years of economic growth. Is this too good for too long?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think people are trying to read tea leaves and figure out what's
Warren
next.
Put out that latest,
indeed she did. But the Wall Street Journal upwards of a year ago started talking about the yield curve and a lot of these market indicators. And so really, to me, I'm looking at Congress, I'm looking at the executive branch to say, what are you trying to do to help kind of stave off some of these areas of concern? Instilling consumer confidence, making sure that the job growth continues. What can we do to try and hope for the best but prepare for the best?
I mean, you've got a lot of people, this is what Warren pointed out, you got a lot of people with a lot of debt. Car debt, student debt, credit card debt. I mean, we are loaded up to our eyeballs with debt.
It's just like the subprime thing, where it's like.
So if something does go wrong, there's a danger that there's a real collapse. Now, on the political front, because that's where we're experts, I wouldn't be so confident that a downturn would be terrible for the president, because this is a president who thrives on chaos.
Well, he'd find a way to spin it, and you know he would. Right. He'd be like, "Well, look, since I've been in office, this is what has happened, and this randomly came out of nowhere because of Obama." He'd find some way to spin it.
The Democrats are standing in the way, and if you give the
Democrats would do the same thing, though. Democrats would say, "Look at what's happened under Trump. We were now in a serious recession, and we're this is all due to President Trump and his economy and stuff like that." So
knows
I think both sides would say the same thing.
He'd find a way to blame it on Baltimore and AOC or something.
No, what I think would be, and actually this would be a totally fair response, would be, well, if you bring Joe Biden back into office or somebody like that, he's just going to pass NAFTA and TPP. And he's like, so you want to try the failed approach, or do we want to try something radically different?
That's fair.
I mean, I think that's probably the only way it would really be able to play out. He'll say, if we bring in one of these radical socialist Democrats, we're going to have Venezuela, and then you'll really know what the problems are.
And then the base will be fired up.
Yeah.
So I would sound a note of caution caution to any Democrats out there who think that a downturn is going to inure to their benefit.
Right.
It's not clear to me that it would. I mean, maybe, but it's
well, I don't
chaos
think
theory.
anyone wants an economic downturn.
No, nobody's. I hope not.
I sure don't.
I mean, I certainly hope not. But you're talking about real people's lives.
Yeah.
I think the system is just so, and this is what we talk about here all the time, the system is just so flawed, and that we have an economy which is structured so badly that yes, it can be doing well on the metrics of which we measure that bad economy, but it's that so much of the fundamentals, which is what Elizabeth Warren is talking about. I mean, we have default rates at it's like 30% or something like that.
A third of
And it's
American adults
if it
have
begins
bills in collection.
if that climbs up to the 40s and 50s, I mean, that's a disaster for the credit markets.
Governor Bullock actually has an interesting line that I've heard him say on this, which is that we want to measure things by the stock market, but too few Americans have $400 extra in their pocket. Where if the economy dropped out, they'd be able to cover.
Yeah.
I mean, we were just talking about it on the show last
Yeah.
week. There was a poll, and not even, I think it was like 90% of Americans under the age of something that couldn't even afford $1,000 extra.
Yeah.
I heard it once put
It's
this
a
way,
disaster.
which is that
It needs
most
to be
Americans
fixed.
are blown tire away from bankruptcy, and I
Yep.
think that's one of the best ways to measure the economy.
Medical bills
Yeah.
to bring things full circle here. Gentlemen, thank you. Pleasure.
guys.
Thanks, guys. Tomorrow on Rising, Democratic debate night round 2. We will preview the big night.
Journalist Paul Steinhauser is going to share his insights from his interview with Senator Elizabeth Warren, and also Young Turks correspondent Emma Vigeland, one of our favorites. She's going to give her predictions as well. Have a great Monday. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.